Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It's amazing. I'm Lisa Tweedy. I run Make Malmesbury Even Better, have done for the last 14 years. And this is exactly why I started that group. So I'm really grateful for you all to come. I really wanted to raise the level of debate. And I think we've got a great range of candidates here who've all got very different views. And I think that's what's really important, that we actually do all talk to each other and find that common ground between us. And so it's not just about winning an election. It's about building our democracy. And that's what's really important. And that's why we need to have hustings. Right. I would like to welcome the Mayor. Thank you very much for letting us go ahead here today. Would you like to say a word or two?
Good evening, everybody. Those of you who don't know me, I am Councillor Phil Exton, your Mayor for the next year. Welcome to this South Cotswolds Hustings. Before we get started, we do have to do the necessary house work that we have to do. I think the first thing is could you all check that your phones are off? Because there's nothing more annoying than a phone going off halfway through the proceedings. Secondly, we are not expecting any fire alarm. What's the word I want, Lisa? Practice this evening. So should the alarms go off, you can see one of the exits is directly in this corner. Alternatively, out the door, immediately right, and we will all meet up outside the Sue Ryder shop. So with that all done, we will get on with the evening.
And I was supposed to say one other thing, which was that we invited all 9 candidates to come today, and these 4 kind people are the 4 that chose to come. But we definitely invited everyone repeatedly, and so that's why we have these 4 candidates. Right, I would like to introduce you to the chair. I would like to introduce you to the chair, who is our vicar of the Abbey, Oliver Ross. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That's very kind. And thank you for all you've done for this evening. Absolutely. Thank you. Just an explanation of what's going to happen. We have an hour. Each of the candidates is going to have 5 minutes to speak, and the Mayor is going to draw from the proverbial hat. It is a bag, but all 4 names are in there, so whoever comes out first goes first. Then after that, we have a number of questions which have been written out. We're just sorting them out into groups so that we can ask those and then ask the candidates. And then at the end, we will have 1 minute summing up from each of the candidates, and then we will close. If that seems fair and all right, I'm looking. Good. So, with that, just 2 rules. No slagging off people or their party. It's not fair. And the second thing is no interrupting. This is an opportunity to hear what each one has got to say. And that's what the purpose of tonight is. Mr. Mayor, who is our first candidate?
We will start with Martin Greenfield.
No, you've got one.
No.
That means that one of the candidates isn't going to give us this. There's only 3 pieces of paper left in.
Owen Humphrys. Let's look at the other 3.
As long as my name's not on one of them, Lisa. 30 seconds is more than enough for me, not 5 minutes.
Yeah, no,
That's
Owen.
you.
You're going first.
Right. Sorry.
I have 3 themes, and they're all connected with war, because I was a soldier. This is my grandfather's blue bonnet in the Black Watch, of which he was the colonel of the regiment. There is a war that's going on now, and it is possible that it spreads. Many of you will have read learned articles in the media about the possibility of the Ukraine war spreading across Europe. There's also a war that we are all guilty of, and that There is a war that this country, which I believe is in great decline, is also guilty of, and I will come to that last. Apart from my writing, my main practical skills have been those of a peacetime soldier. I believe we are in a dark place. As a soldier, I have learnt to see in the dark. Right, the danger of war in Europe spreading. I don't know if you've heard of the Thucydides trap. Good. I won't explain it, but there is a thing where a rising nation, such as China, challenges the existing superpower, which is America. And there could be a war over Taiwan. Will we be dragged into it as we were into Korea in the 1950s? Speaking of my own experience, I joined my family regiment at the late age of 25, and I recommend any of you who are parents, grandparents, or uncles to encourage children who aren't certain what they want to do in life to join the army first, perhaps before university. I never fired a shot in anger, and as far as I know, no one aimed at me. I did quite a lot of jungle work in the Far East, in Hong Kong, and then I went into intelligence work in Belfast and stood once on the Falls Roan under a hail of stones, which is an interesting story. I resigned my commission in 1978 to stand for Parliament, and here I am, 46 years later, finally keeping that promise. I then went back to Belfast to work for the two women who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1976. That's Mairead Corrigan and Betty Williams. I worked in youth clubs, discos. I went to Corrymeela. There were mixed groups of Protestants and Catholics. And I heard Pope John Paul II speak in a field at Drogheda. After that, I rejoined the old Territorial Army for the rest of the Cold War and came out in about 1989. I did about 100 days a year, mostly in the field, and that's where I learnt to see in the dark. I kept up my interest in defence matters. I used to go to the Royal United Services Institute in Whitehall and was known as the man who asked questions, or the man who had two famous grandfathers. After that, All Souls, Oxford, as an undergraduate, listening to all our top generals discussing the changing character of war, Iraq, Afghanistan, our two disastrous wars of intervention. I think we have spent the peace dividend several times over. We have run down our armed forces under all three main parties. I won't give you the details, but my last intervention in national politics was in the general election of 2005, when I financed a battle bus to go around Scotland and eventually to Westminster on the eve of poll to save the regiments. The infantry regiments were the core of our army, and they have been run down to below 72,000 men. If you think Putin's frightened of that, think again. Think back to the 1930s. There was a Spanish Civil War, and although you might not like this description, the war in Ukraine is a form of civil war. They are both Orthodox Christians. And what happened in both Spain and now in Ukraine is both sides are trying out new weapons. The fascists in Italy and the Nazis in Germany practiced their bombing techniques on places like Guernica. And we are using drones, the Ukrainians are firing drones and missiles that we've given them into Russia, into Sevastopol, and across the Black Sea. The next war will begin in space. A late friend of mine, who's a colonel in the Royal Signals, and taught computer...
30 seconds.
Ah, right. My conclusions. Before the end of this coming Parliament, there could be a nuclear war, and I think we ought to prepare for it. There ought also to be preparations which Malmesbury is exceptionally well qualified to do, to prepare for the 2000th anniversary of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, which I think is in 2029.
Thank you very much. Which is an independent. Thank you. Thank you. Next name.
Bob Eastoe.
Right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and once again, thank you, Lisa, for organising tonight. Quick introduction, my name's Bob Eastoe. I'm an engineer, accountant, company director, until I retired a couple of years ago, a recycling entrepreneur, husband, father, grandfather. I've walked the walk and talked the talk when it comes down to seeing how businesses can embrace sustainability and the way we can actually make a difference to the world. What I think we are looking at here is looking at the opportunity of having a really positive vision for what we can in this country do to lead the rest of the world in our wake. And come with us. We have both a practical obligation and a moral obligation to actually work for a far fairer and greener society. And we need to be far more ambitious than we have been up to now in changing the way that we live our lives in terms of our fossil fuels. I have to admit, my father worked for a fossil fuel company. It's not that I'm trying to make up for him. It's a case of I actually now see the science, see what we have to do, and have started to make what I think is my small difference, and I hope some of you can do the same too. The Green Party is the only party with solutions to change the future of our country, and I would like to think, and ultimately the future of our planet. There was a global emergency, climate emergency declared 5 years ago. I'll just say that again, 5 years ago. I don't sense any sense of urgency. And I think you'll see, if you've heard some of the numbers that the Green Party are talking about, we really do need to get behind decarbonising our energy systems, making sure that people have enough to eat, farmers have fields to plough in, and that we can actually have sustainable lives, not necessarily for ourselves, but also for our families, our children, and our, in my case, grandchildren. We can't solve the solutions of the environment without sharing or solving the problems of inequality. We've all heard about issues to do with the cost of living crisis. If you're a millionaire, you haven't got a clue what that's about. You have become wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. And the Green Party have a solution to that. It's called a wealth tax. Only if you have net assets of more than 10 million or more than $1 billion. So, I don't know. There may be people in this room that do have that sort of wealth. But other than that, you will be hardly impacted in making those changes or funding those changes. My other point I would look to stress to you all here today is we have to leave behind the neoliberal economics that we've had for the last 50 plus years. We have to find a different way of existing. If we don't, we won't be here in 100 years' time. Probably not 5 minutes, but that's all I've got to say at this stage. Thank you.
Right. Number 3.
Who shall we have next? Roz Savage.
Nice.
Thank you. Good evening, Malmesbury, and thank you very much to Lisa and Oliver for hosting this hustings. I really value this opportunity to meet those of you that haven't met already and listen to your concerns and share my plans for what I hope to do if I'm fortunate enough to become your MP next Thursday. I'm not a career politician and I won't make empty promises, but I will make this pledge to you. I pledge that I will be an MP who listens, who communicates and serves you, your family and your communities. Over the last few months, I've knocked on thousands of doors in every village and town in the South Cotswolds. I've had over 2,000 individual conversations with residents about your concerns and your issues. People are fed up with broken Britain, with our collapsing NHS, with the escalating cost of living and with the discharge of sewage into our rivers and streams. You're fed up with potholes, the lack of access to NHS dentists, and corruption and cronyism at the highest levels of government. But even worse than all these crises, there seems to be a crisis of hope. People don't dare to expect that the future can be better than the present. And that, to me, is the real heartbreaking tragedy of what's happened over the last few years. I absolutely believe that we can do better. I believe it's time for a fresh start, that we can get back on track for a brighter future in which both people and planet can thrive. And I hope that I can be that fresh start, a new voice for you, and an engaged local champion who will stand up for your interests and work to fix this broken Britain. My liberal values say that everyone should be able to live and work and thrive, should have decent homes and vibrant communities. And I'd just like to take a moment now to say a few words about myself and my background and what made me decide to stand for Parliament. My dad was a Methodist minister and my mum was a Methodist deaconess. They raised me to be truthful and respectful with a real priority on serving others, especially the most vulnerable members of our society. My dad volunteered in a soup kitchen and my mum worked part-time as a teacher in a special needs class. We didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up, but that was not the most important thing in my family. We placed a real emphasis on kindness, service, and education. And I was very lucky that I got a decent education for free. I believe that education is a great equaliser of opportunity. I was the first in my family to go to university, and I was lucky enough to go to Oxford. My younger sister went to Cambridge because she just really likes to be different. And I then spent 11 years working in business in London. But then my life changed in 2003 when I woke up to the environmental crisis and felt that I just absolutely had to do something to raise awareness and hopefully inspire some action. So I decided to take this rather unusual form of environmental advocacy, of rowing solo across 3 oceans, using those voyages through my blogs and my talks and my books to raise awareness of the ecological crisis. So I became the first woman to row solo across the Atlantic, Pacific and Indian Oceans, earning 4 Guinness World Records and an MBE for services to the environment. Those adventures fundamentally changed who I am. To say they were character building would be a little bit of an understatement. I learned that I can take on massive, daunting challenges when I believe it's for a cause that really matters to the greater good. And I'm sure you can see the parallels between those challenges and the challenges that lie ahead in trying to rebuild broken Britain. So since I finished my last ocean in 2011, I've earned a doctorate in systems change and written a book about navigating towards the better future that I believe is possible. So, what do I plan to do for Malmesbury and the rest of the South Cotswolds? My absolute priorities, and those of the Liberal Democrats, are fixing our broken NHS and social care. We believe in a fairer voting system. We believe in education that gives everybody an opportunity to thrive. There is so much good stuff going on in Malmesbury, and I want to take that good work and amplify it. The current government feels stale, our economy is stagnant, and many people feel stuck.
5 seconds.
Thank you. The polls all say that this is going to be a close race. I hope that you might lend me your vote, and I promise I will not let you down. Thank you.
Thank you. And last.
We'll all guess, ladies and gentlemen, that leaves us with just one candidate left, Zoë Billingham.
Thank you. Hi there and good evening. Again, a massive thank you to Lisa and Oliver for hosting this event, which is the first and probably last open hustings we have of this general election campaign in the South Cotswolds. For those of you I haven't yet had the chance to meet, my name is Zoë Billingham and I am your Labour parliamentary candidate. I have 5 brief minutes and I'm going to aim to do 3 things. Firstly, just set out a little bit about myself for those I haven't yet had the chance to meet, although there are a lot of familiar faces in the room. Secondly, set out the issues that I see for our community and our country over the coming years. And thirdly, a sense of what Labour are proposing to make change in our country. The general election next Thursday, the 4th of July, couldn't be at a more pivotal moment for our country. After 14 years of lurching from crisis to crisis, I don't need to name them for you to understand what this country has been taken through political leadership, both blue and yellow. We've had swinging cuts to our public services. That was a political choice. We've had a self-imposed Brexit. On an international level, we are no longer a credible partner. We've had complacency and a diminishment of political leadership during COVID. And we continue to see a cost of living crisis that means more and more people are falling into poverty. This could not be a more critical election. I know as well, through having knocked and spoken on thousands of doors over the constituency over the last weeks and months, that people are more sceptical than ever about politics. And that's actually really sort of scary, actually, because that's when we lurch to the political extremes. But I actually genuinely believe that politics can be a force for good. And when I look at what the last Labour government achieved, whether that's halving child poverty, bringing in gay rights, I believe, government can do a lot of good. So we can, we will, and we must do better under the next government. And I very much hope, if all the polls be correct, that that will be a Labour government. The question is, does the South Cotswolds want to be part of that change? And do we want to be a major player at the table? In terms of my personal background, just very briefly, I grew up in rural Cotswolds in Woodchester, just down the road. Some of you may know it. And I now live in a village in the south of our constituency. I'm a countryside woman and I'm admittedly a horse rider, which makes me apparently a very unusual Labour Party candidate. But I'm here to shake things up and I'm not afraid of that. Professionally, I've worked as an economist for 15 years. I've taken that training both to the heart of government, where I've worked as an economist in the Treasury. I've also worked in the private sector, advising FTSE 100 companies on their expansion plans. And just before leaving my work to campaign full-time, I was leading a charity that is focused on inequality. This means I know how to make change happen. Throughout my career, I've taken the concerns of people from the doorstep through to change, to real change in Parliament and in government. And I am driven by public service. That's why I entered the centre of government as a civil service at the beginning of my career and was there for the best part of a decade. And for me, politics is public service, and I think that's what we need to get back to. Thank you. So what can a Labour MP do for South Cotswolds? I've been reflecting a lot on what it would mean for the South Cotswolds to have a Labour MP. Of course, the South Cotswolds has never had an MP here before, given we're a new constituency, but I would very much like it to be a Labour MP so we can have a seat at the table. We live in an area of immense beauty, but actually also, although we have above average income and wealth, this hides a lot. This hides hidden poverty in our constituency. I've spent time at Cirencester Food Bank over the last 2 weeks. And, of course, we have a food bank in this very building in Malmesbury. And over the last year, over 4,000 emergency food parcels were distributed from here alone. So we have hidden poverty amongst our ranks, and we are not immune from the challenges that the country faces. So what to do? If elected as your active, rural and experienced Labour MP, we would have a voice at the heart of government. It's not going to be easy, and no one's pretending it's going to be easy, but it's important to be ambitious. So that's why my priorities are bringing down NHS waiting lists, returning to economic stability, and doing what we can to tackle the rural cost of living crisis, proudly delivering on clean and green growth and not shying away from the hard decisions, investing in our public transport that we know is all too essential in communities like ours, and creating opportunities for young people. Speaking to young people across the constituency, I know they're the often overlooked party, both at our level but also at the national level. So in conclusion, now is our time. Nothing is decided in this election. If you want an experienced voice at the heart of government representing your interests and our South Cotswolds constituency, then I urge you to vote for Labour next week on the 4th of July. Now all you have to do is vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, each one of you. Really appreciate it. And thank you for being so open and straight. Well, there are lots of questions. More than we can possibly get through. But can we turn and ask you, I will, in a sense, at each question, start with a different person at the front. But the first one is actually about Lyme Down. And we've got more questions about Lyme Down here. What are you going to do about Lyme Down? Do you have any thoughts in the balance between the production and solar farms? What are your thoughts, policy on Lyme Down? And they go on that form. Briefly as you go, but would you like to start, Anne?
I know very little about Lyme Down, so I'll simply say I think this country needs to use less electricity. We have an awful lot of people who invent new ways of doing it, and if I can do an extreme policy, I would like to put out an international arrest warrant for big tech who've made slaves of so many people.
There's a groan and a worrying shake of heads. Right. Zoe.
Thank you. So Lyme Down, that's the large-scale solar farm in the south of our constituency, for those who aren't aware, is a question that's being put into planning at the moment, and it will be decided whether it goes ahead under a Labour government. Now look, I'm totally open about the fact that we do need more renewable energy, wind, solar and tidal, over the coming years, and Labour has clear targets for 2030 that if we are to be ambitious on climate, we must proceed and meet. And that, for me, does include also increasing the amount of solar we have in our own constituency. On that basis, I have, on Lyme Down specifically, I do have concerns. I do have concerns about its scale, its ambiguous community ownership, and also the owners themselves. So these are outstanding questions for me. But I am pro more renewable energy, including in our constituency, and with a Labour MP under a Labour government, we can influence what that Lyme Down proposal looks like and ends up being delivered in our backyard. Thank you.
Bob?
Yes, I'm aware of Lyme Down. As a project, it fails my tests on a number of scores. I think Zoe's mentioned some of them already. The owners. This is simply repeating the same issues that we have at the moment in terms of maintaining high energy costs. The bank involved in this have an awful track record of fossil fuel investments. This is a little bit of greenwashing on their part. They've also done a lot of damage to the UK economy and other places. So, oh, sorry, I thought I was being oh, there you go. There you go, that's better. Got to sit up straight, yes. So I have grave concerns simply about the economics of how this is being put together. The biggest issue that I have is there is no plan. I mentioned earlier that we have declared a climate emergency. You would have thought that within 5 years there would have been a plan as to how these renewables would have been implemented and where. I mean, it is nice to know that we live in the sunniest part of the UK with so many solar farms here. So there is no reason why it should be here. Some of the gaps between the sites, I had not realised until I was shown by a member of Malmesbury community the picture of how dotted around it is. It's just nuts. It also shows to me the fact that if landowners, stroke farmers, feel that they get a better return for renting out their fields for solar farms, then we've failed farmers in terms of the way that we support them to produce the food we need. So I think there's a lot of questions to ask which I'd want answers for before even considering it. And why solar? I know that we have had a de facto ban on wind turbines, onshore wind turbines, but they can generate a lot more per hectare than solar farms can.
Thank you. That's great.
Right.
Can I pass on to Roz?
Thank you, Oliver. I've had many meetings with various stakeholders around the Lime Down project. I've had meetings with the Stop Lime Down Committee, with Island Green Power. I've been to the consultations. I've spoken to people whose homes will be impacted by the development. And after doing all of that due diligence, I have not shifted from my original position, which is that even though as an environmentalist for the last 20 years, I absolutely believe that we do need to move away from fossil fuels. I believe that Lime Down is the wrong size, it's in the wrong location, and it has, as has already been pointed out, it's in the wrong ownership. And I would like to push for there to be a coherent national framework for renewables that prioritises rooftop and brownfield sites and community-led renewables projects so that communities have more say in the scale and the location and also reap the benefits. Thank you.
We're running out of time. It's running away. You have a minute afterwards at the end to throw back in. There was one question here which said, I don't think we've got time to actually talk about it, but to actually add into the mixture is the right to roam, because so easily when these things happen, all those rights are closed off. And so in all the debates, it would be good to hear that in there as well. This is a slightly sideways question. We've had a number of people who have asked about your experience. And if you get into Parliament, what would you be bringing as experience into the pot? And can I say in a short phrase, what would you bring into the pot?
I know how government works, and I will take your concerns directly from the doorstep through to change at the national level. I've done it before, and I will do it again for this community. Thank you.
Experience. 40-year career in business, a variety of businesses, has taught me that you listen to people and you learn, and then you put into plan. That's it.
Roz.
I have already said that I am new to politics, and if anybody says that I don't know how politics works, I would say that politics at the moment does not work.
I first had a House of Commons past 70, working for a Liberal MP who won the Orpington by-election well before anyone's time else on the panel, but someone may remember it in the front row here. And I also, while I was still a regular army officer, on leave, I put out leaflets for the original Green Party, the Ecology Party. Jonathan Porritt was a friend, and I leafleted the whole of Fulham for him.
Thank you. Right. From all of the candidates, different experience. Youth. I've got a lot of questions here. How would you help young people remain living in Malmesbury? What are your plans for young people of Malmesbury? There's very little for them to do at present. Why should 16-year-old children who the law makes responsible for their debts, they can't buy alcoholic drink, they aren't named in court, but they can't be allowed to vote in a general election?
No, why should they be allowed to vote?
Why should they be allowed to vote in an election. And then another one, what have you been involved with the young people in the local environment or educational activities? And do you support the expression of Malmesbury Primary School through the £6 million grant from James Dyson's Foundation, which is sort of ancillary, but it is in the youth department?
Well, what was the question?
The question is, what do you think?
Do you support it?
Do you support it?
Oh, it's me, isn't it? I'm sorry. Contemplating that. I happen to be a town councillor, not unfortunately in Malmesbury. So I too am experiencing some of the issues from a different perspective of disaffected youth, shall we say. There has been huge pressure put on local authorities in terms of the services that they provide for youth, young people, children, and this is almost part of why we're here, because I've heard the same thing, that we are trying to fix broken Britain here, and it is the skinnying out of all the services which actually we used to take for granted, which aren't there. So is it any wonder that some children appear to be a little bit absent-minded in certain places? In terms of how we keep people in Malmesbury, if they are young people moving into their career paths, then it is a case of, well, are there any houses? And I would imagine that the answer for that will be no, as there isn't anywhere else in the Cotswolds. There is a requirement for doing a lot more house building and a lot more social housing. That doesn't necessarily mean people who are necessarily the old council tenants, but there are so many young people that actually in their careers, the early parts of their careers, don't know where their career will take them. They do need to move. They don't want to be bogged down with the, shall we say, the lumbering aspect of a mortgage at the age of 23, because it restricts potentially where they might be going. So there does need to be a lot more social housing built, which clearly you might expect the Green Party are fully behind building that as much as possible. The next question is where, and the issue will be in a suitable place. Many of them are not. Can I just mention the 16-year-olds? 16-year-olds. We are now talking about young people. A lot of people that do vote tend not to be that young. It is, I suppose, a failure of our politics that there are so many young people that don't vote because they don't think they have a voice. I think that it would be a good thing to give those people a voice, and we may want to question some of the fact that my father, who's 90, is a little bit forgetful, still has the opportunity to vote. He hasn't got a clue what he might be voting for. No, he can, but we don't question it at that end.
Roz.
Thank you, Oliver. A lot to cover in this. My usual approach, which applies to this as well, is I've been out and about having conversations with people and doing my due diligence. I've been listening. So I've spoken at 7 sixth form colleges around the constituency with those young people who are just approaching adulthood about what their hopes, dreams, concerns and worries are, and how we can really include them more in the political process. So the Lib Dems would reduce the voting age to 16. They're old enough to pay taxes, so they're old enough to vote. We would like to restore youth services that have been cut by the Conservatives. We would like to provide more apprenticeships, more affordable housing, including 150,000 social houses per year. We would like there to be education that is genuinely fit for the future that these young people are facing. And we would also very much like to put mental health provision on an equal footing with physical health. This is an absolute epidemic amongst our young people. So many are struggling with their mental health, and frankly, when I look at the future that they're facing and the country that they're growing up in, some of these were 4 years old when austerity started. I don't blame them for suffering from mental health issues. And they, in those tender years, every moment counts. They need to get that support on a timely basis. So that is really important to us.
Owen?
I've lived in Marston Maisie, which is halfway between Torry, Fairford and Whig, Cricklade. And earlier this year, I offered to the scout groups of both those towns the use of a field where I planted several thousand acorns and now have 500 trees about that level there, by the lights. And I thought I would offer cash prizes for the best campsite, the best meal, and the most prisoners. No reply yet.
Right. Can I just...
Hang on.
Sorry, you haven't had your chance.
Haven't had my chance.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
So the Labour government has also committed to delivering and taking forward in government a reduction of the voting age to 16 and 17. We already do it in Scotland and Wales, and I think it's not so clear-cut what changes at 16. There's a lot of things, whether it's certain rights, drinking in restaurants, or, there's a lot of blurring of that age band between 16 and 18, and I fully support empowering our younger people. And partly the reason is that all the challenges we're going to face as a country and as a planet are going to be very much things that we need to act now in order to save later. And that is, we need to get the young people's voice heard on that. And that's why I think one of the reasons we haven't acted fast enough on climate change. Which brings me to climate change, which is one of the biggest issues that young people raise when you speak to them about what they care about and what they really want to see in terms of political action. And that's why I'm proud of how ambitious our goals are as Labour to bring forward those targets for renewable energy to 2030 and make sure that they can see that political leadership is doing everything we can to stop the irreversible effects of climate change. Through cuts to local government, that's why we've seen the decline of things like youth clubs. And obviously that, I do think, is at a critical age. They can scoop up a lot of people and, you get to meet lots of people that you wouldn't meet maybe at school or whatever, as well as supporting families who might need support with childcare in the evenings. Building new homes, Labour's committed to 1.5 million new homes over the next 5 years, including social housing, and that's an absolute must. And again, those are tough decisions sometimes at the local level, but I think as long as we build the infrastructure alongside, that's absolutely something we should feel very positive about. And just to pick up the question that nobody else responded to about Dyson's investment in our local schools, I would much prefer that an investment into Malmesbury schools is into Malmesbury schools, not a school, and I do have concerns about the impact that has and how that skews people's decisions between the various schools in Malmesbury. But I do think that when we look at the cuts that our schools locally have faced over the last 14 years from Conservative and Lib Dem governments, we can't tell them not to take it. And so I think we've got to be pragmatic and we need investment in our schools. So if that's where it comes from for now, that's where it comes from for now. But in the future, I would like it to be evenly distributed and ideally invested in by the state.
Would you mind if I ask the others to comment very briefly, on this issue of James Dyson's generous gift? Because you didn't get a chance to say.
I'd rather he paid... sorry.
They may have.
Personally, I'd rather he paid £6 million more tax.
It is indeed a very generous gift, and I'm glad that Malmesbury Primary School is extending hospitality, I believe, to neighbouring schools to come and also use the facility. We need to make sure that the primary schools in neighbouring villages remain viable and don't lose pupils from their pupil roles.
Owen?
I'm not a fan of Dyson. When you compare him to Brunel...
Right. Okay, on that note, let's move to something else. Could I just ask, you don't have to do this, but just how many of us have used the NHS in the last year? Okay, this is a personal question. And I think it's, Roz, you that are down to do the first one. Basically, people are asking, what on earth can we do to the NHS to help it? It seems to be in such trouble. Recruiting more nurses seems to be a problem. The whole issue of training. We have others who are asking, why have we got into a state where we've fallen from our former glory? There was a sense in which the NHS was a service and it now seems to be a system. And what are your views really on sort of making treatment available to people? I think that's more about a question of doctors and being able to get in there. And I presume, do I hear the word dentist murmured in the... Yes. Roz.
Yes, thank you. I'm grateful to say that I am one of those few people who has not needed to use the NHS in the last year, but it was just a bit more than a year ago that my mother had a stroke and died a couple of weeks later, and I want to say that the NHS staff who took care of her were absolutely magnificent, working in very difficult circumstances. So, like all of you, I'm sure, I do very much appreciate the great institution of the NHS, but it is absolutely on its knees. And what the Lib Dems would like to do would be to recruit 8,000 new GPs so that people are guaranteed to see a GP within 7 days of needing an appointment. So that's the front door to the NHS. We also need to fix the back door, because at the moment the social care system is just not working. So we end up with people stuck in hospital who would want to go home, but they just can't get the care that they need. So the whole system, pardon the metaphor, is constipated. Like, it's blocked at the start and it's blocked at the end, and we need to get it flowing again. I know here in Malmesbury you've got a very good primary care centre. However, some of the surgeries in villages around are not quite so safe. The surgery in Shurston at the moment is potentially caught between a rock and a hard place, where they need to move out of the existing facility. And if that new surgery isn't built there soon, that's going to bring another 3,500 patients into the Malmesbury Primary Care Centre, and it just doesn't have the capacity. So that would be top of my list of priorities as your MP. And we also absolutely need to give dentists the incentive to take on more NHS patients. It breaks my heart to hear that dental decay is the #1 cause of children being admitted to A&E. And it's not just the pain of toothache. That comes with a whole load of other associated health issues, like respiratory problems. So we absolutely have to get this sorted out. I've heard about people trying to treat toothache with Bonjela, and that's just not going to cut it. So the NHS impacts all of our lives. There's so much more I could say about this, but I'm aware of time passing, so I will leave it there. We have to get it back up off its knees, and the Lib Dems have got a really solid, fully costed plan to do that.
Thank you to the NHS for my new hip. I would not be standing, let alone running, if I hadn't had a new hip in February. I had a brilliant surgeon, and when I signed myself out of the hospital because they wanted to go on treating me for something else, I gave my surgeon a list of low-tech aids to recovery. I think we are enslaved by high-tech, and we're enslaved by ambulance-chasing lawyers who frighten the daylights out of doctors, nurses, and everyone else. I had the privilege in the army of doing a week of nights in a London A&E hospital. Fascinating. Doctors and soldiers and nurses have a curious black sense of humour. Zoe.
Underfunding the NHS is a political choice that has been made under the last 14 years of government. And under the last Labour government, waiting times in the NHS were at a record low, and they've only gone up and up and up since then. And that's when we get people in declining health whilst on a waiting list, and that's why waiting lists are the #1 thing that has to be sorted in order to get our NHS back on track. And that's why we've committed to thousands of new medical staff in order to do so at all levels, and bringing back more evening, weekend appointments to make sure we can clear that backlog. And we've committed to an additional 40,000 appointments a week in order to do so, as well as bringing back the family doctor so that people have consistency through their treatment, because we know all too well that often records are lost or diverted and things take far too long. So that's what I want to see. My only thing that I'd like to come back on in terms of high tech is that I do think in certain elements that NHS is held back by poor technology, including, for instance, not having enough scanners. So that's the sort of thing that we do need to invest in immediately. And an investment in our health is an investment in the wealth of our country. So let's get it back on track. It's an emergency.
Right. Very simple thing to start with is pay people. We have some absolutely fantastic people that put themselves in some very stressful positions to actually do some fantastic things for us, and they get paid £15 an hour. I actually know 4 trainee doctors. You give your life up for 6 months at a time, where you are going to be told where you will be every hour of the day for those 6 months. And you have to book holiday at least 6 months out for it. You are a machine, and you get paid something like £15 an hour when you take all those other issues like your cost for your grant, well, not grants anymore, are they? It's your student loans, yeah. And as a doctor, your loan is going to be bigger than anybody else's. So we have to get real. Clearly, when it comes down to training doctors, yes, you do need to train doctors. It takes 7 years. So anything that we do from next Thursday, it's going to take you 7 years to see the first doctor. So where are they going to come from when we talk about the numbers that we would like to see? One is stop them leaving at the other end. There are a lot of, my personal friend is a GP, and he has just got sick of it. He has chosen to leave. We need to bring him back in. We need to get those people and make them feel that what they're doing is valuable for us and for the rest of our society. Training. We go back to training. The Green Party would actually go back to the old days, like myself. I didn't pay to go to university, and I got a grant to go to university. I'm that old. It's not the same for probably 33, 34-year-olds. They all have, or probably have, debts. We have to go back to a way of making training, not just for NHS workers, but training across the board for everybody, a lifelong learning issue. So that's one issue. And one other issue which I think we tend to forget, because it's embedded in what we are paying for at the moment, are PFI contracts. We have, at the moment, from 2018, we paid for £60 billion worth of value, and we will be paying till 2040 £200 billion in terms of cash. So when these contracts expire, we can take these issues back into national ownership, and we can provide those costs, those activities at far less. So.
This is the point where we would normally sort of hand over and just say 1 minute each. But I feel that I've got lots of questions here. We're not going to be able to go through all of them. Would you like 10 more minutes? Yes. Would you be happy to do us 10 more minutes? Okay. Can I ask you for a one-word answer? This is about PR. So are you for it or against it? Yes or no?
For it.
For it?
For
it.
Again! So 3-1.
One question was proportional representation.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking about public relations.
Okay.
Are you against that as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We're still with the same answers for proportional representation. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. But it leads on to another question, and I've got a lot here. Basically agonised about the language in politics. Language about the parties, the language about politicians, the language about the people, the mixture of people in our country. We've also got language about people who are in Russia or Ukraine or Palestine, Israel, all these things go on. And that sense in which somehow politics has been degraded by the way that we treat each other and the language that we use. And the question is really, on all of them, what can you do for us to bring trust and that sense of pride that we could have in our politicians back? Roz, you were the last one, were you? Taking off, so I think it will be you to start.
To be honest, I don't think I'm going to be in Parliament, so I'll pass to the next person.
No.
It's a great question and a very pertinent one. As I say, for me, politics is about public service. That's what I've done in my career so far, and that's the values and the principle that I would bring to being your MP. And the Nolan public service principles of honesty, openness, integrity are central to that. I think there's many other things we can do. The Labour government, for instance, has committed to a COVID task force that will claw back as much of those £1 billion worth of money that was spent and misspent by the Conservative government over COVID in order to demonstrate that actually the state won't let people, steal from the state. I think other things we can do. I would love, I love having this conversation with you tonight, and I would love this sort of forum to continue on a regular basis if I was your MP, so that we could have a regular conversation about all these, totally pertinent, spot-on issues that are being raised tonight. So I hope we can vote to get the adults back in the room in Westminster and bring public service back to politics.
I'd like to think that what we call the great British public have a very strong sense of fairness and decency. And I think we should expect that of politicians. But that seems to have gone out the window. I also think that maybe I have had a fantastic career, looking forward to my next career, but I think we do need to have a sense of reality about what the world is like before you go into politics, so that you can bring that with you when you are talking to people in our society.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sure that anybody who's been out knocking on doors this election may well have been on the receiving end of some fairly frankly expressed opinions about politics and politicians, irrespective of party. So clearly there is a lot of work to be done to restore that relationship of trust between the elected and the electorate. People are just so fed up with Punch and Judy politics. They want to see grown-ups in the room talking seriously about very serious issues. So those Nolan principles that Zoe mentioned, the Lib Dems would like to see those enshrined in a ministerial code so that our elected politicians are actually held to account. I personally would also like to see a lot more cross-party collaboration. It does seem that politics has become too tribal. Thank you. Especially on issues that really need to have a long-term horizon, like education, like the NHS, like agriculture, where investments need to be for the long term, and the professionals that work in these areas need to know what the long-term vision is, so that they can plan and invest and train accordingly. So if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, I would like to be really active in building those cross-party collaborations. And I would also be delighted to work with absolutely any of you, no matter whether or not you voted for me. Thank you.
And this is sort of the last question. We have got other things. We haven't mentioned about refugees here, and we haven't particularly raised as an individual question the issue of the environment, though it has been raised by different candidates. But I've got just a collection, there are 4 here, but it's echoed other places. A real sense of distress from a farmer. We've been hit hardest by decisions that have been made. Brexit has been made, and we can't go back on that, but what are we going to do? We've been hit hard. Others, how are we going to provide for ourselves? And grow food for ourselves? How are we going to deal with the whole issue of our utilities? And that whole question of that Brexit and the place that we're in has led us into a place where there seems to be more in the way of what do you call it, sort of documentation and things like that. Things seem to be, the word was constipated. How do we go forward? We know where we are, but there are these pieces of which are now in the puzzle. How do we deal with them? And Zoe, I think it's you next.
Yeah, absolutely, a lot to unpack there, thank you. So on Brexit specifically, the person who posed the question is absolutely right that Brexit, whether someone voted for it or not, was not the deal that people thought it might be, especially for our farming community, who are now being undercut by trade deals that our government has made that undercut our British farmers by importing food at a lower quality from non-European countries. And we seem to be in this horrible stalemate while that our farmers just can't compete with that. So first and foremost, just to make farming even economically viable for those of our farmers who are, you know, proudly still in the profession, to make sure we're not allowing that to happen, making sure we're holding the countries that we're importing food from to the same high standards that we expect from our own British farmers. So first and foremost, that has to be fixed. Just picking up on the point I got around sort of biodiversity and farming, I think for me they're two sides of the same coin. We need to improve biodiversity in order to support our farming community, but of course food production is the absolute, you know, I can't believe we're not talking about it more, right? Because our yields are going down, and that's partly because of climate change as well. We're getting droughts and floods, and the crops in our own country are suffering, and our yields are going down. And that's why it's so linked to climate change, and that we need to take bold action, not only to try to, you know, ourselves help mitigate the worst effects of climate change on our farming community and on food production, but also to show leadership in the world so that others follow suit. Thank you.
Bob.
I'm going to go with the Brexit element first. Probably the biggest self-inflicted wound anybody's ever done. What has been delivered was not what anybody thought it would be. Obviously, one of the consequences is there should be 350 million a week being spent on the NHS, but where is it gone? The trade deal issue, yes, absolutely catastrophic issue for the farmers. The Green Party would pull out of those deals. That they are not the right thing for our farmers, our food security, or for that matter, for the environment. We would be looking at putting in a carbon tax so that if you're looking at importing your beef from Brazil, as I think we're potentially looking at doing, as we have done in the past, somebody's got to fund that transportation cost, the upheaval costs at the dockside, the transportation costs. All of that is why we're in the mess that we are from a climate point of view now. So those issues would hopefully give our farmers a better, more level playing field. There is, unfortunately, a march of the mega farm in the UK. We see a lot of family farms going to the wall because it hasn't become economic for them to do it. They have to take the price that they are given for their produce, be it milk or dairy or whatever it might be, which is set by massive organisations using monopolistic powers. It's not right. There needs to be a food commission that helps farmers get a fair price for their food, which is produced in a humane and sustainable way. That's what we will be proposing. There is one other issue, which is we may actually be contemplating having to pay certain farmers what effectively is some form of universal basic income so that they can do what they need to do to their farms to make them work, to make them viable. Again, one of the considerations that we'd be doing.
Awesome.
Thank you. I think a lot of people are realising that voting for Brexit was voting for a pig in a poke. We just didn't know what we were getting. Clearly, the Lib Dems have been consistently the most pro-European party, and we are the only one that's got an actual four-step plan for rejoining the single market. I think we can see now that the damage to the British economy is depending on the figures you look at, between 4 and 8% of our GDP. It has been a serious own goal. As for farmers, they absolutely need a fair deal, because if we have no farms, then we have no homegrown food and we have no future. This is a real world issue. We can't just import our way out of this. And the farmers are facing so many challenges. They've had such terrible weather this spring. They've got challenges with getting seasonal workers. They're facing foreign competition, changing finance structures. No wonder that they're committing suicide at 3 times the average rate. It is really, really tough to be a farmer at the moment. I'm glad to say that the NFU has warmly welcomed the Lib Dem manifesto. And the same cannot be said of all the party manifestos, I'm afraid. So I really hope that regardless of who is in government, that I will have the opportunity to work with farmers. With my background as an environmental campaigner, I absolutely recognise the crucial role that they play as stewards of our land, and even more importantly, of our soil, to adopt regenerative practices and to grow food in a more sustainable way that can meet more of our domestic food needs, so that we're not as dependent on these fragile international supply chains that have seen the cost of food really so hard hit by inflation, meaning that families have struggled choosing between whether to eat or whether to heat their homes. So it all joins up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Owen.
When my family moved to Malmesbury in 1954, more than half the village were involved in agriculture. Now no one. It's all contract farming. The farmland is completely and utterly sterile. There is insecticide, herbicide, and fungicide, and every other form of pesticide you can think. So the wildlife is clobbered. My second point is this. If I realized this about 40 or 50 years ago, if everyone on this planet lives at the standard of living which English people seem to expect as a right, then this planet is bust. End of. There are 9 billion people, and they cannot all live the way we live. And that is an environmental question which is ducked by all the big parties. The land in Malmesbury will be dug up to provide the aggregates for Starmer's 1.5 million homes.
I'm sure it'll be taken from a few more places than just there. And
I've looked at it.
Smaller sites. Come on.
Right. So 1 minute each. Are you happy to go in the order that you went before? Yes? Yeah. Or do you want to go by ballot?
No.
No? Okay. 1 minute.
From here?
You could stand up from here, yes.
Right. I'd like to take you back to Sir William Beveridge's report in the middle of World War II, when we were starting to think about reconstruction. He named 5 giant evils. Disease resulted in the NHS. Squalor, a huge housing programme run by Macmillan. Ignorance, Butler's 1944 Education Act. Idleness, jobs programme. Want, poverty. I'd like to challenge everyone in this room to think, what are the 5 giant evils afflicting this country now and that has brought us so low? I bought a book in the wonderful Oxfam shop here the other day and found a quotation which I've now mislaid, but it said that you can tell when a country is in decline when people stop attending holy worship.
Thank you. We're at a pivotal moment for our country, for our community and our country. The South Cotswolds, the question for us here is, do we want to be part of it, or do we want to be relegated to the opposition, fighting in Parliament the same old fights over and over again, or part of the change that is coming and that I very much hope is coming next week on the 4th of July? Vote Labour. Thank you.
I think it's a foregone conclusion that we will have a new government next week. Absolutely. which gives you guys a fantastic opportunity. You can actually vote who you actually believe in. Don't need tactical voting here. There will be a change of government. I will leave you with the words of Sir David Attenborough. Anyone who thinks that you can have infinite growth in a finite environment is either a madman or an economist.
Thank you all for all the brilliant questions that you've raised here tonight. So many issues to address, and I know it sometimes seems like our problems are so numerous and so huge and so daunting. I've done a doctorate in analysing some of these problems, but heck, you don't need to have done a doctorate to know that there are going to be no quick fixes. We've got ourselves into a deep hole, and it is going to be hard to climb back out of it. But I know that I can do difficult things because I've done them before. And I believe that when we work together, we can get on top of these issues. I absolutely believe that positive change is possible, that we can fix this broken Britain and restore our standing on the international stage. I believe that we can solve our problems if we come together, if we share ideas and resources and work together towards a shared goal. So next week, July the 4th, I hope that you will place your faith in me. I really believe that I have the qualities that I can use to bring us all together, to collaborate, to combine forces and to create a fairer, better, brighter future for the South Cotswolds. Thank you.
I just want to thank all four of you for coming, for speaking so plainly, so with such candour, and with a lack of acrimony, which is so often present in political talk. But thank you. It's been instructive, very helpful. Thank you. I just want to say, combined here is an enormous amount of experience, knowledge, and understanding. We may not agree with everything, but this is a very hopeful sign. We have people who are ready to serve, who have been wanting to put the effort and the energy in. And thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Lisa, a huge thank you to you for everything that you have done for this evening.
Can I? Yes. Can I have a mic? Hello? I want to thank the four candidates because without them, this would not have happened today. So I'm really immensely grateful. And I really think each of them brings something valuable. I think we've kind of covered that. I did get a little gift for you all. So there's a card for Owen. Owen, I think you bring something really valuable to the debate. And that's, I think an independent candidate really can bring a different, they're not tied down by the party, any parties, so they can bring a really different, fresh perspective, and I'm really grateful. Zoe, as a woman, I think you two together are, you're either, I can't remember how many stood in 2019. In our constituency, I know that I was the second woman candidate ever to stand in 2017. And I think you two, obviously it's a new constituency, but you're kind of the next level. So I really hope one of you gets it, but I don't know. We'll see. Sorry. I'm sorry, Bob. And I shouldn't be saying that because I'm actually a member of the Green Party. But I have been really honest with Bob that I'm not going to be voting for him. So but Bob, I really have enjoyed our discussions. We've met a couple of times, and it's been really interesting, and you've got a really great perspective. And lastly, Roz, again, another woman. And yeah, really fascinating. And I loved our interview the other day. It was really, it was really a pleasure to get to know you. So, thank you, everybody, I think. Oh, lastly, the Mayor, thank you again for letting us be here. Oh, yes, and please join us for refreshment. We're going to, we've got some coffee and tea and wine. So please, and come and talk to the candidates and push the thing. Thank you very much. We've managed to live stream this event, and I would never have been able to do this sound like John has provided. He's a professional, does this sort of every week, and we only gave him 2 hours to set up, so it was amazing that he did this. And then Doug and Matt, who helped him out. Really good job. Excellent. Thank you very much. And Miranda and Jess, who've been running about this afternoon and earlier in the week sorting things out, and thank you to them as well. And also to my fellow mods and Make Malmesbury Better, who do an amazing job. They've been, the last 5 years, they just, they're every day, they're kind of moderating the group and trying to make it a safe place to speak out and talk about things.
Can I encourage you all to stand? We're all part of this new constituency, the South Cotswolds. Can I encourage you just for a moment to stand, to think of the people of this area, this constituency? If you pray, you might want to do that. But this is the moment just to take a thought. We're going into an election. I will say, may God guide us. May God be with us.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Let's be silent for a moment. God guide us and God be with us. Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thank you for joining me and joining us all. It's been great. Thank you again.